Welcome to Man in the High Castle, Season 3, Episode 9, Review, Baku. Frank Frink is dead. Again. But what does it say about the overall vision of the series? Will viewers feel the payoff was worth seeing the same character die twice in 2 different seasons? Or will they turn off, tune out, and leave, and not return for Season 4? This question and many others we will ponder in this installment. This episode Baku received a composite score on IMDb of 8.8, and like I did last installment, I'm going to review the highest composite score and the lowest composite score based on demographics. So the highest average of 9.1 came from males 18 to 29, and these are all of at least 10 reviews. The lowest average score came from females 45 and older, 8.2, which is and what's interesting is, because I also noticed last episode that that demographic, females over 45, gave the lowest score, seemed to be consistent among the episodes that I reviewed. I went back like about 4. So I wanted to see, is it a woman thing? Is it an age thing? What is it about that demographic that just does not seem to be responding to the same degree that the other demographics are? So I looked at the split between male, female, young, old, and the split seems to be consistent. Males 18 and younger and females 18 and younger have their reviews are within like a point or 2. Same for males between 18 and 29, 15, and females age 18 to 29. Similar score, not beyond the mean of 3 points, but the female 45 plus, it has a 6-point difference between that demographic and the demographic of males 45 and plus. So 8.2 for the demographic of females age 45 and over. It was a score of 8.8 with males age 45 and over. I really can't, maybe it's a small sample size. It is more than 10 voters, but I struggle for why that demographic is not responding. I would just have to start pulling out generalities to find an answer. Oh, like they don't like science fiction. They don't like science fiction. Some of them do. I know they do. I have friends of from that demographic. I've heard one of them tell me she won't read science fiction. So maybe it's selection. No, I'm struggling. I just don't understand. We'd have to dive deeper, like poll people from that demographic and see why they're responding at a more negative value than males in that demographic are. Very interesting, at least to me. Director of the episode, Deborah Chow. In the past, she is a winner for the Toronto International Film Festival Award for Best Canadian First Film for the movie The High Cost of Living, and she's been doing TV work. I don't want to hazard a guess what the other shows were. I don't remember. Two writers on this episode. We have the Chris's, two different Chris's. We have Chris Collins, who's also written for Sons of Anarchy and The Wire, excellent show. And Chris Wu, who's also worked on Hand of God and Bosch. And because the showrunner for this season also worked on Bosch, there have been a number of writers who also worked on Bosch that were working on Man in the High Castle this season as well. Saw a few of them for the first time. The director of photography was unlisted, maybe James Hawkinson. He seems to have gotten the most work out of all the DPs this season. So if I'm going to hazard a guess, I'm going to say he did it as well for this episode. And then the location breakdown, a little strange. There were a couple episodes. There was one where Tagomi was talking to John Smith, and so Tagomi was in the Pacific Coast states, and John Smith was in, while he was speaking to him on the phone in the Greater Nazi Reich So do I count that as one vote, one tick for Pacific Coast states and one for Greater Nazi Reich? I decided to count it as other because it was not fully centered in either location. So the voting, the tally, 10 scenes in the Greater Nazi Reich, 8 in the neutral zone, and 3 in the Pacific Coast states. And it seems to be consistent that the Greater Nazi Reich gets the most scenes written for it. It goes with my kind of feeling that the Nazi storyline is more fleshed out than the Japanese or the neutral zone, to the detriment of the show. That it's a missed opportunity. That those characters in both the neutral zone's weak. It has not been developed, but the Pacific Coast states has some very good characters, and it's just that potential's been wasted. They could have brought in more of the high command from Japan to kind of fill in the picture of what the Japanese government's like. But c'est la vie, maybe next season with a new showrunner. Plot, as always, from Amazon Prime. Juliana and Wyatt's mission takes them further east and dangerously close to the center of a top secret Nazi project. To be a grammar Nazi, it's farther east, as it was written in Amazon Prime. And that's correct, actually. It's a distance, so we say farther, not further. Trying to improve relations between their sides, Tagomi reaches out to Smith. Smith makes a crucial discovery. I have to ponder, what is that crucial discovery? Are they talking about the film that he finds about his own family in, I guess, the alternate timeline? I assume it's like our timeline. And finally, Kido finds closure. And I love how they cover up character deaths with euphemisms. Juliana narrowly escapes a dangerous situation. Here, Kido finds closure. Yeah, because he opens Frank's neck. That's how he finds closure. So my commentary on the plot. The one thing that's missing here is Helen. I'm really happy with the way they fleshed out her character this season. And the way that they brought in psychotherapy to explore her relationship with her husband, John Smith. And also as a way to prompt the growth of the character. As I commented last episode, I believe, that for all its negatives, the way that Jungian psychotherapy is used in the Greater Nazi Reich more as a means of indoctrination than as a way of fulfilling the individual's potential. We see Helen flowering we see that she has flowered under the care of her doctor. The one way we can see this, one detail, in season 2, there's a scene where one of her friends begins to gossip about Hitler, that she thinks Hitler's sick, but even though the TV is not reporting on that. I think they're reporting that he's just taking a vacation. And Helen tells her, we do not gossip. It's not something that we do. But yet in this episode, we see that she kind of plants the seeds about Goebbels. I think it was Goebbels having the gimp leg. And so we see that the strictures that held her in place before, that made her want to be the perfect Nazi wife, she's beginning to question and rebel against those. And at the end of the episode, she finds that she can no longer belong in society. She flees because to belong in society means to surrender up the health of her and safety of her children. And she has enough courage now. It goes back to Thomas's death. When she told the psychotherapist she felt so helpless watching Thomas go away. And when the nurse comes with the soldier to take a shot, she finds the courage then and stops the nurse from injecting her daughter and potentially finding muscular dystrophy. I assume it's muscular dystrophy is what Thomas had. One note, when Helen is informed that the nurse is coming up, even though the scheduled checkup was supposed to occur later when John Smith returned from the neutral zone, when she learns that the nurse is coming up regardless, she kind of plays with her earring. I think it's the same year where she lost the earring after killing, I can't remember the name of the character, but the wife of the doctor. I believe it's that same year. a very interesting little tell on her part that she goes to that, because she knows that the danger that came from that, how close her family came to losing its position and potentially losing their lives when the plot to reveal her killing was almost spilled. So when she went to that year, it was saying the depths that she was willing to go to protect her family, just like her husband, John Smith. So looking at Wyatt's character, so again, going over the plot, Juliana and Wyatt. Wyatt's character is starting to really get fleshed out. We're getting associates of his now. So anytime a character is given other characters to interact with, it boosts the importance of that character. You don't give a second banana a third banana to bounce off with, not without making that second banana a first banana, really, or a B tier character. And here we're given a whole cast of revolutionaries that, well, now they're smugglers, and they used to be fighters for America during World War II, and we can only assume they're going to be revolutionaries. If anyone has forgotten, the first episode of the season was a flash forward of Juliana. It's cold open too, I think, kind of off center. Was a flash forward of Juliana and some revolutionaries kind of walking through a forest, and it's the same forest that we see in the episode where she's in the Poconos, where she recons, surveys, surveillance, spies, and Anarby, the institute where they're trying to pass into the next world. It's the same jungle where we see her and the revolutionaries at the beginning of the season. I assume they're going to be Wyatt's whole crew. Almost 95% certain next episode, episode 10. That's when it's going to happen. Because if it's not 10, when? And next, we had, in this episode, we had a nice little scene between Tagomi and John Smith, Rufus Sewell, and Carrie, I can't remember his last name, the Japanese-American actor. And it was nice. It was not the most tense scene because, in this case, Tagomi was trying to seek a level of rapport with John Smith. So, the stakes were a little lower. It wasn't that if that negotiation failed, one of them would die at the end of the scene, for example. But they were tense enough because Tagomi was looking at preventing a war from breaking out between the Japanese Pacific States and the Greater Nazi Reich, so the stakes were there. And it was in a shadowy apartment, so the lighting was very intimate, kind of brought out the performance of the actors. There's the scene where Carrie's character tells Rufus's character that he too has suffered the loss of a son, so my fullest condolences to you. And then Rufus does his moment of introspection, and you see that play out in his face, and you see that the grief looks real, not just painted on. It seemed like Rufus really put himself into the emotion then, the way that you kind of see it around the eyes. You didn't know. A real smile and a fake smile you can see around the eyes. Involuntary muscles in the eyes squint when it's a real smile because chemicals get released when the person feels warm. And same with grief too, when someone's really feeling sad. Those chemicals kind of involuntarily move the eye muscles around. So that's one way you can look at the mark of acting. Is that person really feeling the scene, or are they just saying lines? Look at the face. What are the muscles doing? Things that the actor can't control. Are the face muscles responding to the emotion in the scene? If they are, then the actor is really feeling the emotion then. What else do we have? Kido. Oh, Kido. We'll talk about Kido in a little bit. That's about it for the plot summary. Now, let's move on to the next installment. Next, I'm going to talk about the music of the series. something I haven't discussed at all, I don't believe, in any of the other installments. But since we're kind of coming to the close of the season, I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to share my thoughts about the score for this season. And I'm going to differentiate between score and soundtrack. So score being the music that was composed specifically for the show, and soundtrack being the music that they licensed for the show. And I have a different attitude for the two. The score, and I want to break this into 3 different sections: the good, the bad, and the ugly. For the good, let's begin with the good. The composer, Dominic Lewis, he was co-composer in seasons 1 and 2, and then became the full composer in season 3. The bulk of his work is already done for him. The core themes are really strong. I like the main themes of the series, and I like the way that they remix them using different instruments depending upon the mood or the character that's in the scene. That works for me. The one theme, I don't know what they refer to it within the show itself, but in season 1 it's the track called The Necklace. It's a very wistful tune. If you don't know what it is, you can go search for it. I can't play it right now, but it's a very nice tune. It's been used many times, and I think it's effective every time. Before I get to discuss the score more, let's discuss the soundtrack. The soundtrack is nice. I like the way that it reinforces and fleshes out the world. Almost every time a song is played, if I go research it, there's a story behind it that counterpoints the scene itself, which I really appreciate. And especially the way that they use music and the neutral zone to always reinforce that the music you're hearing there is different from the other sections. More Negro, quote unquote Negroes, they would have called it then, Negro music, blues and rock and jazz. Again, we're in the good. There were a couple standout moments for the score in season 3. In particular, the episode we're discussing right now is 9, the very end. The tune that they play during the closing credits sequence is great. It just sort of, the fact that it happens after the scene ends carries the emotion over, kind of reinforces it, makes it stronger. Really appreciated that. Now for the bad. Mostly it's rehash this season, and I think that in general they just don't give enough time. TV shows don't give enough time for the composers. They need much more time than they get. Movies give them much more time and as a result get better music. And you get what you invest in. And then you invest in money, you invest in time, you invest in manpower, all that. And they just shortchanged, in my opinion, writers and the composers are shortchanged in television. They don't give them enough. I think the composers maybe get slightly more respect than the writers do in Hollywood. And I think in the pecking order of where writers are on television, they get more respect than they do in films. But just because of the realities of television, it's just a rush to film to make it. Even if they are given more respect and what they write is treated with more veneration, the actors are less likely to improvise. They're just not given enough time. Just because there isn't enough time to give, it's unfortunate. I think the writers should get more time. Television shows, as the quality has increased, the budgets have gotten larger, and the way the film looks better. Everything has gotten better, but the amount of time they give the TV writers hasn't grown in relation to that, and the money they're paid. They're paid less. There's more shows in production now than there have ever been because of streaming, but the writers are being paid less than they have ever been paid. It's just a situation that makes me very unhappy, since writing is my thing. So the score is mostly a rehash, and I think a lot of it has to do with you have only one main composer now instead of 2, so one person is doing more work than they did before under really tense time constraints. And my main problem, since this is the bad, is that I think this show would really benefit from a John Williams approach, meaning that you get a theme for the main characters, you get a theme for each of the locations they go to. Can you name a theme that from the show where you think of the Greater Nazi Reich that isn't the main theme of the show? Edelweiss? which is supposed to represent all the world of Man in High Castle, not just Germany. Again, the German part of the show is always stronger, in my view, than the Japanese or the resistance. Can you think of a song from the score that creates that world of the Greater Nazi Reich for you? I should not be able to. How about the Japanese Pacific states? How about the neutral zone? It's not there. How about characters, themes that represent the characters? We were introduced a great character this season, Wyatt. Is there a theme for him? Nope. So that's one way I think that the show has really suffered, especially like when you compare it to the work that HBO is doing, that the composer who works on Westworld and Game of Thrones, you see character themes there. Every season a soundtrack is released, and that soundtrack feels different than the season before because he was given enough time and enough resources to really make to fully utilize the power of music. Okay, so that's the bad. Now the ugly. The ugly. Here, this I lay at the foot of the composer. It was bad. I'm willing to say that it's the exigencies of composing for television, that there just won't be enough time. So you do the best you can under the worst circumstances. That's if I'm giving a pass for mediocre work. And by that I just mean all the rehashing. The new stuff is great. The stuff at the end of Frank's death was wonderful. But just all that rehash and music that doesn't really say anything. A lot of that now for season 3, I lay at the foot of the composer, Dominic Lewis. This is a quote from flickeringmyth.com. Dominic Lewis said, "I think we're going to try and pull it back. Going to try and go a bit more minimal with it." Well, to quote Robin Williams, it was so minimal, it was subliminal. I just, the score this season doesn't stick with me. And again, it's not can I whistle the tune after the fact. It's do you utilize the potential of the scene, or are you losing something because the music doesn't rise to the occasion or even flesh out the scene more? I went back to look at, remember for episode 5 I talked about how I had problems with Sabra. I still have problems with Sabra. It's never been fleshed out. The character, we had the scene in episode 5, to go back to my thought, where Frank is facing the danger of being expelled from the community of Sabra. And none of the characters were developed. Of course we have Michael Gaston, because he's been in season 1 and season 2, and his girlfriend, I always forget her name. See, and that shouldn't be on me. Her character should be memorable because she's kind of the representative of Sabra. Is it Iris? I'll get it. I remember I wrote it down for last episode. Iris? I want to say it begins with an I. In any event, no other characters in Sabra have been fleshed out at all. Yeah, I won't find it in time. I believe it begins with Iris. But that scene where Frank narrowly avoids being expelled, and it's uplifting because it's democracy in action, grassroots democracy in action. I went back and I remember another critique I had was that it's that Frank is late to his bar mitzvah practice with Michael. And the reason he gets for being late is he had a conversation. He just came back from a conversation with, we'll say, Iris. I couldn't find her name. Oh, you know what? I've got this in the computer. Give me 1 second. I have the Amazon loaded up here, the character list, in case I had stumbled. But I'll continue and then hopefully find her name. So Frank comes back with a meeting from her, and she talks about how that there are people looking for him, Yakuza, and that there are some people on Sabra who are unhappy with him being there. And this is supposed to kind of plant the seed that will later be the scene with the voting in Sabra. And we don't see the scene of Frank having this meeting with Iris, Irene, whoever. And we're told, and that's like rule number 1 in writing is show, don't tell. And so we have no attachment to the community of Sabra. Maybe we have attachment to Frank. I do, but I know plenty of viewers do not like his character. I'm trying to find Iris, Irene, Still not there. It's too bad. All right, so in Amazon, right there. I know this makes for riveting viewing. And so I went back to look at the scene for the scoring. And the scene with Michael and Frank has no score at all. And I watched it, and to be fair to the composer, it would be really hard. You would have to put it in at the end, maybe. The scene is too natural. There's not any rhythms that would allow for that, or pauses that would allow for that moment where the music could spell out the emotion of the character. And that's what music can do. It can spell out the inner life of a character. So the life that can't be verbalized or shown in body language. All right, I'm looking on the Amazon list. I think I see her. No, that's Caroline. No, wrong character. Okay. Thank you for being patient with me. She's not even listed. So why am I supposed to think she's significant if she's not even listed in the cast list of the show? So okay, we'll call her Iris Irene for now. If Amazon can't be bothered to put her name and image up here, then obviously she's not an important character. So the scene with Frank and Michael, no scoring. And then we get to the scene of Sabra, where the vote happens with the potential that Frank gets kicked out. And at the very end, when Michael starts talking about Sabra is a desert flower with a very soft, succulent center, that's where the score finally kicks in. And we needed that score before, because the writers weren't given the opportunity to flesh out the characters of Sabra. We needed something to give us investment, to tell us that this is all significant, this scene is significant. And if only, and it would have been hard, he would have he would have had to have had the director give him B-roll of just characters in the scene between Michael and Frank staring for a moment, just to allow the music to come in. But if he had introduced the theme that he uses at the end of that scene of Sabra, where they vote to keep him in, if he had introduced it earlier and ended it on a down note, so that when we get to Sabra and the music begins and we feel that there's the echo now of the scene before with Michael, but this time instead of ending in a down note, and ends in an up note. I know in music there are notes that you can create tension with, and notes that can fulfill a chord. I don't remember what the technical term is, but if he had done that, that would have been one way that we could have built viewer engagement in that scene. So that's one way where the music kind of fell short this season. Anything? Look closely. Yeah, okay. So that's all I have for the music. Again, good, bad, and the ugly. Overall, not so happy. The highs are high. There have been some really nice moments with the music. Soundtrack, I'm pleased with. Score, not so much. Now we're going to look closely at that final scene of Frank's demise, and do a commentary, shot-by-shot commentary for that, and then we'll come back when that's finished. The start of the scene, this is the location of the real-world location of Manzanar, which was a war relocation center. It's now a U.S. National Historic Landmark, and it is a 14-hour drive to go from Denver to Manzanar, and that drive would take you in this timeline from sunrise to sunset, which is significant given the murals and posters that Frank has been placing in the neutral zone. Filmmakers spend about 1 minute introducing the scene, and then another 30 seconds to get Kido out here as he's walking out, and all that time for setup. You only do that for a significant scene. You only burn that much time in a show where time is a really precious commodity if it's going to be in a very important scene, and you feel that all that time and setup is going to add to the tension of the scene. Obviously, we know that Frank's in danger because Kido has it out for him. So our expectation is that something terrible is going to happen. And when you expect that something bad is going to happen, then the filmmaker can spend extra time
before springing the bad thing on you, because every second will be imbued with danger. Okay, coming up to 2 minutes, and we still haven't had any dialogue yet. Pretty significant, this much time spent building up. And here we go. Kido begins talking about the place of Manzanar and how he was part of the Japanese forces that freed the interned Japanese Americans that were being kept there. And all this exposition is really not to give us backstory, but to build character, to show the motivation of why Kido is bringing Frank out here. Kido could have just whacked him in the street if he really wanted to, but he didn't. He thought it was important to bring Frank here. Important not just for the ritual of executing Frank, but important for something inside of Kido. Now, we're about to get a little bit of Kido's narcissism, where he says, "You've been speaking to me this whole time," and then Frank says, "I've been speaking to a lot of people." The fact that Kido took those messages as related to his psyche shows that Kido is not a healthy individual, potentially not a healthy individual. He's lacking empathy. The way that he was able to kill Frank's family, never show any remorse, and the way that he's been able to torture throughout the series. You can only do that if you're lacking empathy. That's something Philip K. Dick had talked about, the Nazi soldiers being able to kill children and not show any empathy. And that was one of the great concerns of Philip K. Dick, was one of the two, which I've mentioned before, is what is reality, what is human? And for Dick, the key to being human was to feel empathy for others, and it's something that Kido's been lacking, and that Frank struggled with for 2 seasons because of the anger he felt from Kido's actions on him. But in this season 3, Frank has been able to find empathy with others, and because he's found empathy, he's found freedom. In a way, Frank is the character that's free here, and Kido is the prisoner, even though physically the roles are reversed. Frank is the one that's prisoned by Kido at this moment, and whose life is going to be extinguished. Really, Frank is the one that's free, and Kido wants to know what is the key of that freedom. And here he asks, "You're not afraid of death?" And Frank says, "No, not anymore." It's because he has no remorse. He's living in good conscience. And Kido says, "A death without honor." That's where he has fear, because for Kido, reputation is everything. For many Japanese, that's not just a Kido, a quality of Kido's character. But if we view Kido as being a narcissist, then his reputation is more important than maybe the truth. And this bow is a sign of significant respect from Kido, along with the execution that he's about to do. The execution is called zanshu. It's a decapitation, and for capital punishment, the most honorable death is seppuku, where you are allowed to put the knife into your stomach, and generally there's someone also standing there to behead you in case you falter. Being allowed to execute yourself is the most honorable death. However, below that is zanshu, and that's the death that Kido's giving Frank. He can't give him his freedom. Kido's reputation and Frank's fate are all intertwined now at this point. But he can give him a sign of honor, which is what he's doing. And Frank is about to begin to recite the Shema Yisrael. It's a traditional mitzvah for Jews to say as their last words. And roughly translated, it means, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." And at the end of his life, Frank is turning towards his religion, while Kido, in this very important moment, is turning towards the ritual of the nation, of his job as a high authority, a figure of authority within his country. So very, very different where these two gentlemen are going at the end of Frank's life, and as Kido's about to take Frank's life. And here, Kido is about to come out through the sunset which is what Ed had said he thought the posters were, which the figure of Kido coming out, the figure in Frank's poster Ed thought was a figure coming out of the sunset. And that is exactly what Kido does here after he strikes the killing blow. Sun behind him, and there's the sunset. And that is the sunset of Frank's life. And that is the end, basically, of episode 9 and the end of Frank's life.
And now to Frank. Frank, what you gonna do? As I said earlier, the main question is, will viewers come back for season 4? I imagine most of them will. Some of them may be faster because they were unhappy with the character Frank, but it just seemed very pointless to bring the character back and to do it in a way that really was not believable. Frank should have been killed. Kido should have been killed. Kido was willing to give the writers the benefit of the doubt because his second-hand man, his right-hand man, died. So you could always kind of justify it by saying that Kido's assistant blocked the force of the explosion of the bomb, and so gave his life, maybe inadvertently, and in doing so, by giving his life, allowed Kido to live. You could kind of write it off that way. Frank, it's just divine intervention. That's what the writers used to justify it. And the whole divine part about the sun, I thought was interesting. You know, the Japanese god, the creation god, is tied into the sun, and it's a part of their national identity. So to bring that into Frank's story and then relate that to Kido by making Kido really the image that Frank's been seeing, and that Frank's death and Kido are also connected to the sunrise and the sunset. All that's very interesting. It's just unnecessary. All that time you spent on Frank this season, and some of the best scenes this season have been with Frank, and it was great to see the actor get better material to work with, because I think they really ruined his character from jump, from the word go, from like episode 2 season 1. Episode 1 season 1 not so much. He's still kind of undefined, but they changed his character in a way that I thought ruined it, changed him from the book, just the core of who he was. But so they bring the actor back, they bring the character back, and then it's just it's the same thing again. It's Kido. Him and Kido have a showdown, and this time Kido lives and Frank dies instead of both of them dying. Like I said, I read the Reddit every time I finish the episode. I go on to Reddit, to the Man in High Castle subreddit, and see what their reaction is to the episode. It kind of gives me a feeling for what is the general consensus. And I know some people think that was just a waste of time. It was just redoing season 2 again in season 3. The only difference being you gave Frank a little bit more growth, but then you killed him. Now I imagine that his death will be an inspiration to the revolution. That the writers are really good. There's no unwasted scene for the good and the bad. I think generally it's good. You don't want too much fat. But I feel there's a place for scenes that develop character but not plot. Kind of alleys and distractions occasionally. But that doesn't happen in the show. So if they brought Frank back and they gave him some growth, some character development, and then they killed him, there will be a point. Somehow it will relate to the plot. Whether I'm happy with that or not remains to be seen. But I think that they could have, and so if they do that, well, they have done it, they've killed Frank. But if his death somehow relates to the rebellion and inspires people, then that's one way they can justify him. And then another interesting angle that occurred to me, one of the associate producers in the X-ray notes for one of the earlier episodes in this season said that Kido's story is the story of an inadvertent immigrant, which I think implies that there will be character growth for Kido, but we haven't seen any at all. He's been very static, a pure antagonist. We've only seen a little hint of a growth in the way that he's been relating to the bar girl, where he seems to be feeling jealous about her. That's the only development we've seen with Kido. Kido's development is, does he get his man or not? More like he does get his man. When does he get his man and how? So my thought was, what if Frank's sacrifice, and there seems to be a connection at the end between Frank and Kido. Kido shows Frank more respect than I think he's shown any character in 3 seasons, apart from his right-hand man. If perhaps Frank's death inspires Kido and brings about that change that the quote from the associate producer hinted at, that Kido's story is a story of an unwanted immigrant, one who sees change without realizing it. What if Frank's death now inspires Kido? Because Kido is questioning Frank about fear. And he asked Frank, "You don't really fear death, do you?" And Frank said, "No, I don't fear death," because Frank had a spiritual conversion. So there was an afterworld for Frank. There was something more. Kido said the only fear he has is dishonor. Where are they going to go with that? That doesn't get dropped. The writers will have some payoff for that. So maybe Kido dies a dishonorable death, or maybe he dies a dishonorable death because he has a conversion, like Paul on the road to Damascus. And he's the one that turns. We've been waiting for Tagomi to turn. That was my thought. The writers are really good at investing us in complicit characters. And between all the characters, the access power characters that we have, the big ones principally being John Smith, the antagonists, John Smith, Tagomi, and Kido. Of those 3, Tagomi seems to be the most kind-hearted. But as he says in his conversation with Kido, Juliana is working with us for now and helping us to keep our empire in order. Tagomi, he's painted as a conservative man, but a compassionate conservative, not to use my own term. So my thinking, maybe in his heart, Tagomi still believes in the empire. He just believes that its rule is being misapplied. The conflict that we saw, that was kind of broadly painted at earlier in the season between soft power and hard power. You have to take the soft power, the lighter touch, and there was never any payoff for that. Never much development. No characters introduced that could have embodied that conflict, really. What if Tagomi, in the end, is an imperialist? And Kido is the one who ends up flipping towards the resistance, the character we never expected. That would be a surprise, and not an unheralded, not a twist that hasn't occurred before. Wouldn't be completely out of the blue, but that would be a nice little twist in development and payoff for us viewers for the patience that we've had with Kido. One of the more interesting characters in the show, but very static. What if he were to be the protagonist and Tagomi still being compassionate, but in the end being the antagonist, standing in the way of true revolution? That would be an interesting turn. So if Frank's death leads to that, then that would be something. But if it just leads to rebellion in the streets, you didn't need Frank for that. You could have spent the time on Wyatt, this great character that you brought in. Instead of bringing Frank back, develop him more and his conflict with Sabra. You could seed the conflict he has with Michael Gaston much earlier in the season, rather than jetpacking it into episode 8, almost at the end of the show. And it's all about how do you utilize the time that you have in each episode? How do you utilize the manpower? These are the things, these are the marks of the showrunner. The showrunner is the one with the vision and the tools to maximize the potential of the show. So I guess I'll wait till episode 10. We've got one more at the end of the season before I give my final view on the showrunner, but it's very, very conflicted at this point. And I could say a little more negative than positive, but we'll see how things tie up. A good ending obscures a lot of faults, so I'm hopeful that it ends well. Let's move on to the In Case You Missed It, and then close shop down. I did have one, in case you missed it. Wrigley Field home of the Chicago Norsemen, 1963 soccer champions. That's what the sign outside of Wrigley Field said. And interesting side note, which I got from Reddit, Chicago is home to a large Scandinavian population, so calling the Chicago Cubs, changing their name to the Chicago Norsemen would be apropos. And I looked up, was it Lila? Yes, Lila Jacobs. So not I. I is the second letter, but it's not an Irene, or I don't know what was going on about. That is all for now. Be well, and I hope to see you soon. I hope you'll join me again soon for the last episode. And we're almost done, kiddies. Goodbye.